Good afternoon and welcome to the Faith and Belief at Work Business Summit, hosted by the Religious Freedom Center of the Freedom Forum and by the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. I'm Gene Policinski, President and COO of the Freedom Forum Institute. Let me introduce Stephanie Vander Zanden. Stephanie is a global business leader with over 20 years of experience in leadership, talent development, business management, intercultural communication, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. During her tenure as Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Schreiber Foods, she successfully developed and executed Schreiber's global diversity and inclusion strategy from the ground up. It was at Schreiber where we had the opportunity and privilege to work closely with Stephanie to bring religious diversity, inclusion, and accommodation training to the employees at their global headquarters. Stephanie is currently the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Company, LLC, where she helps organizations move forward on the diversity and inclusion journeys. We look forward to hearing from you, Stephanie. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I first want to thank the Religious Freedom Center for inviting me to be your keynote for today. It is an honor to share with you my personal experience, and I really hope that you find some nuggets that really resonate with you today. I'd like to start out by addressing the proverbial elephant in the room. Many of us have been conditioned our entire careers to believe that you shouldn't talk about religion in the workplace. There are many individuals and organizations that think that eliminating religious convictions in the workplace is the goal. But I'd like to share a differing perspective with you today, that creating an inclusive environment where people can bring their whole selves, including faith and belief, is a critical aspect to a positive work environment and loyal employees. So let me just share with you how I first got connected with the Religious Freedom Center. We got connected back in 2018 when I was working at a large Forbes 100 organization, and I had built their diversity, equity, and inclusion practice from the ground up. We launched Heritage Month celebrations, and as a part of that, we celebrated Pride Month every June. LGBTQ inclusion was an important part of our diversity and inclusion efforts. And we didn't have a month dedicated to religious diversity. So I realized we needed to spend more time discussing religious diversity when I would get pushback during Pride Month. Some of our employees had voiced concerns that we were trying to push a particular agenda, when in fact, our agenda was inclusion. However, we hadn't yet carved out the space to talk about religious diversity as a part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. There were several factors that really highlighted the importance to proactively promote an environment where beliefs are recognized and respected in the workplace. One of them was from one of my mentors and dear friends, Sonia Ransa, who is a global diversity and inclusion strategist. Early in my role as a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, she shared a key concept with me that I always reflect back on. And that is, diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a cafeteria. You can't pick and choose what you want. Many organizations decide to focus on topics that they feel might be safer. However, when you only discuss some dimensions of diversity and ignore others, it can lead people to think that you don't care about their identity, what matters most to them. Faith and belief are foundational aspects of identity. And by excluding them from dialogue, it forces people to suppress a core part of who they are. This is called covering, and covering can be really exhausting. It forces people to spend a significant amount of time and energy to cover up who they are when they could be instead putting that time and energy into their job. It has an important and direct impact on productivity. Another factor that really highlighted the importance of promoting an environment where beliefs are recognized and respected is the platinum rule. Many of us grew up learning the golden rule, which is to treat others as you would like to be treated. The platinum rule takes that one step further and asks us to treat others as they would like to be treated. How can we really know how others want to be treated if we can't even talk about it at work, right? So there are some examples of how we can apply the platinum rule to faith and belief. For example, if you have a coworker with dietary restrictions due to their faith, choosing a restaurant or providing menu options for a work lunch that accommodates their dietary needs is an inclusive practice. Knowing and understanding the holidays that are important for your coworkers and choosing dates for important meetings that don't fall on those dates is another example of an inclusive practice. So, very simple ones, but the list goes on and on. And failure to consider how employees want to be treated can make it really difficult and challenging to navigate in the workplace. Now, on the contrary, being intentional and offering accommodations for faith and belief creates an environment where employees are more productive, they're more innovative, and they're more engaged. Embracing the faith and belief of others in the workplace doesn't mean you have to compromise your own faith and belief system. Writer, performer, and video maker Dylan Marin developed a helpful mantra that empathy is not endorsement. So empathy is a key ingredient to understanding others, but it can feel really vulnerable to be empathizing with someone that you profoundly disagree with. Empathizing with someone you profoundly disagree with does not suddenly compromise your own deeply held beliefs and endorse theirs. It just means that I am acknowledging the humanity of someone who is raised to think very differently than me. So what does this all mean for you and your organization? Ignoring faith in the workplace leads to exclusion. Research shows that exclusion activates the same area of the brain associated with physical pain. In other words, exclusion literally hurts. If you're looking to create a faith-friendly work environment, you need to be intentional, and that just doesn't happen on its own. You need to create policies and practices that support a faith-friendly workplace. Simply stating under your anti-discrimination policy that you don't discriminate based on religion is not enough. There's a clear connection between levels of accommodation regarding faith and belief and levels of accommodation on other important diversity factors such as gender, race, and LGBTQ+. Organizations need training to do this effectively. And the Religious Freedom Center has that training capability. The training they offer can help you take a deeper look at your policies and practices and support you to build a faith-friendly environment. When I brought them into the company I was working at, they really helped us to build our skills around ensuring an environment of accommodations. After the training, I was able to review where we had gaps and where we needed to update our current policies or create new policies that didn't yet even exist. One of the things that the training helped us to uncover was that even though we had some policies around accommodations, they weren't very well known within our organization. So we needed to do a better job of ensuring that the policies were reviewed during onboarding and that our employees were aware of them and where they could go to find them. Another thing that we did after the training was to write a religious expression policy. We didn't have one previously, and the Religious Freedom Center helped us to draft a new policy that promoted an environment where diversity of religion and belief is recognized and respected. And it also helped to make clear that employees should never make others feel compelled or pressured to participate in religious or faith-based activities. The training was extremely beneficial, and it helped us to talk more frequently and openly in the workplace about religious diversity. It also identified a blind spot that many weren't aware of our accommodation policies. Interestingly enough, we began to see fewer complaints during Pride Month. It really highlighted the importance of not excluding the topic of religion, faith, and belief in the workplace and how it could benefit the entire organization. Practically, I know you can't make a policy for every single scenario, but the idea is to provide a framework to help you and your employees navigate for successful outcome. This transforms the culture to a place where everyone feels empowered to bring their whole and authentic self to work, to truly create an environment where everyone can thrive. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here and to share with you my experience and how embracing religious diversity and inclusion strengthens the workplace. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much for your remarks today. We are so thankful that you've been able to join us to kick off our summit, to share your experience and insights with us. Thank you so much. For everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Paul Lambert. I'm a business fellow with the Religious Freedom Center and the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, and also lead our training efforts. And of course, had the wonderful opportunity to work with Stephanie to design and then deliver the training at her organization. We're really grateful that we can follow up her remarks with a few minutes of question and answer to dig a little deeper into some of the wonderful insights that she provided. So Stephanie, we'll go right into that. And again, we thank you for the time you've already given and the time that you'll give now. So let me just start off, Stephanie, you talked about how you were led to address faith and belief in your diversity, equity, inclusion work. What concerns did you have as you considered addressing faith and belief at work? And when you did, when you actually made your thoughts public that this is a direction that you thought you should go, did you get any pushback? What was your experience with that?
Yeah, so the biggest concern I had in addressing faith and belief at work is that we do it right and that we were consistent across all faith and belief systems. So even though our intentions were good, I wanted to be sure we executed consistently across the entire organization. That meant we had to all be on the same page. So when we started out initially on our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, and launched business resource groups, the organization wanted to exclude religious business resource groups from forming. So initially, I would say that yes, there was pushback. However, as we moved along in our diversity and inclusion journey, I think that the organization started to understand that by excluding a particular dimension of diversity that is a core part of identity wasn't necessarily an inclusive approach. So we changed our business resource group formation policy and became very open to having an interfaith business resource group if there were people interested in starting it.
That's great. Now on that, so it sounds like this was a matter of kind of explaining the business case, explaining why it would be a good thing, explaining why it fits in with diversity, equity, inclusion. Who were the main stakeholders that you needed to talk about in that process?
Yeah, it was our Diversity and Inclusion Council. So that was made up of our CEO, several executives were on our council, members from each of our business resource groups, several folks from our HR team, as well as our communication team.
Great. Now, Stephanie, you talked about the idea that inclusion does not mean endorsement. I really like that you explained that and that insight. So talking about that or thinking about that, you said that it's about acknowledging humanity. Now, with that in mind, what impact did you see as employees felt more free or more willing or more able to bring their whole selves to work, particularly regarding faith?
Yeah, so for many years, there was a group of professionals that would meet on Fridays over the lunch hour in one of the conference rooms at our corporate office for Bible study and prayer. So the organization had always been open to this. So it's not like the culture suddenly changed overnight. But we really didn't talk much about how to be inclusive to people of all faiths and beliefs and what that really meant and looked like. There's a tool that I use often for many dimensions of diversity, not just for faith and belief. It's called Flip the Script. So I'd ask myself the question, would we allow people of all faiths and religion to use our conference facilities for similar purposes? The answer was yes, but we had to make sure that that response was consistent across the entire organization. As we started to talk about it more and more proactively share our policies, a lot of people were happy to learn that they didn't have to check their faith or religion at the door when they walked in. And I truly believe that people were more productive as a result because they didn't have to spend their time and energy uncovering who they were.
Wonderful, wonderful insight. Now, you mentioned that the training, the training that we worked on together, that we provided, was one of your first steps. Now, why did you choose to start with training, and how did that impact the journey of addressing faith and belief in the workplace?
Yeah, so the training was important because you simply just don't know what you don't know. So in my role as Director of Diversity and Inclusion, I wanted to bring in a subject matter expert to help increase our cultural competency around religious inclusion. I did that with all dimensions of diversity. And I myself was on a learning journey along with our entire organization. So it really helped to open our eyes to some blind spots and provided a framework and some food for thought on areas where we could get better. One of the things that I think our employees and leaders were confused by was where to draw the line between religious expression and when they felt that people were pushing their beliefs on others. So the religious expression policy really helped to address this. And we had some panel discussions with our leaders to talk through it as well. We really promoted the concept of managing behavior and not belief. We revamped our onboarding process so employees knew about the policies and where to find them. We also updated a lot of our policies, such as our charitable giving policy, to ensure that it addressed whether giving was allowed to faith-based organizations. So it really helped us to be clear, consistent, and make sure that we had equitable practices as it related to faith and belief.
So it sounds like it was much more than just training. It sounds like the training started, but then from that training, you really looked in where does this apply throughout the organization. I know that we, for example, worked with you on how you needed to update your policies and so on, but that's really interesting. So it sounds like you took that training and then you went to kind of various different aspects of business operations, onboarding, for example, and said, how do we need to apply this lens to this particular aspect of our business?
Yeah, the training really gave us a baseline of knowledge that we could help apply to taking a look at our policies and making sure we had a consistent approach. And it just really gave us that framework.
Great. Now, I want to emphasize the point you made at the end of your remarks, and that was that following the training on faith and belief accommodation, you saw greater inclusion in other areas. You specifically mentioned kind of the LGBTQ plus area. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Like, what did you see? What was that connection, the correlation between those things? And explain a little bit more about what you meant with that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we had received a lot of pushback during Pride Month, particularly from the conservative Christian community. Many felt that we were pushing a liberal agenda. And once we started talking about religious diversity in the workplace and that bringing your whole self to work also includes faith and belief, we started to get less pushback during Pride Month. I won't say that it completely was eliminated, but I really think that it helped underscore the fact that inclusion includes everyone. Everyone wants to feel included, and by not proactively talking about faith and belief in the workplace, many felt excluded. And as a result, many became more understanding of our efforts around LGBTQ inclusion. So we also proactively shared information that faith and LGBTQ inclusion are not mutually exclusive. Research shows that 52% of LGBTQ adults identify as religious. So these conversations help to break down barriers and dispel stereotypes about both members of the LGBTQ community as well as those from faith-based communities.
That's great. So a lot of our research shows, I mean, this goes right along with what we've looked at, that, the more you can increase diversity inclusion around a topic like faith and belief, the more you see that inclusion and diversity increase. I guess the diversity is there already, but the inclusion efforts and the ability for people to bring their whole selves to work increases in other areas as well. So it sounds like you saw some of that. Now, did you, when you started this, I guess this is kind of going back to my first question, but as you started this effort to address faith and belief in the workplace, did you see pushback on the other side? So you mentioned that during Pride Month, you saw some pushback from people that felt like they weren't represented in that. Did you see, when you started to increase your faith and belief accommodation, did you see pushback on the other side, or what was your experience there?
Yeah, no, I never experienced that. I didn't feel like as we expanded the dimensions of diversity that we were exploring and talk about, I never felt there was pushback. I felt that, there was a lot of curiosity in the conversation, and that, I mean, I think that, as I just mentioned, it's not mutually exclusive. So people were actually excited to have those conversations.
I love that point, Stephanie. It's not mutually exclusive, and again, that's something we often, when we're working with organizations, we navigate. Where we have to talk about is that, right? It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a pie that you have to get, right. If there's diversity inclusion pie, you get your biggest slice, and there's enough diversity inclusion. There's enough accommodation to go around for everybody. In fact, I'll just put a plug in. One of our breakout sessions is led by Kent Johnson. For all of our listeners, all of our audience today, Kent led this effort at TI, at Texas Instruments, and will certainly share that in his breakout session as they were launching a faith-based ERG at Texas Instruments. They worked really closely with the LGBTQ plus ERG, and still to this day have a wonderful relationship, and really it's increased, all boats rise type thing, right? It's increased the accommodation mindset at Texas Instruments. And that's certainly been the case that we've seen in many organizations that we work with. And it sounds like that was exactly what happened at yours as well. Now, Stephanie, you've done a lot of work around the world in your career. How do you see this focus on faith and belief at work playing out in companies that have a global footprint? Now, to put a little more context here, in the United States, we have laws and policies that are specific to diversity and inclusion, like Title VII. Most companies have policies specific to the United States around non-discrimination, things like that. For companies that have a global footprint, like yours, what should you be keeping in mind, or how does this play out in a global company?
Yeah, so I would say that focusing on faith and belief in the workplace is equally important for global organizations. It really doesn't look that much different than how we would approach it in the US. The dominant religion might be different in each location, but the principle is still exactly the same: to ensure you have an inclusive environment where an employee of any religion can thrive. So what do your policies look like in other areas of the world? Do you allow time off for holidays that are not related to the predominant religion? Do you have a religious accommodation policy? Are your employees and leaders trained consistently? You might have to adjust policies according to the local law, as you mentioned, the ones that exist in the United States, and put them through a local lens. But really the concepts, and it's important, are universally applicable.
Great, thank you. So we're just about out of time, but I have one more question for you, Stephanie. We get a lot of questions with the organizations we work with, particularly when they first reach out to us. They say they're where you were in the beginning, which is, I'm thinking about this. I know that our employees, we have a big group of our employees that are religious or have a certain belief, and we want to be able to accommodate that. We want them to feel like they can bring their whole selves to work, but we just don't know where to start. So you are a practitioner, you've been there. Where do you start? What advice would you give to that organization that is at that spot? This seems like a big thing. It's kind of a scary topic. How do I start? What's my first step?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, you just don't know what you don't know. So you need to get that knowledge and bring that knowledge into the organization. And, with diversity and inclusion, I always say you have to meet people where they're at. So your starting place might be different from an organization in a different area of the country or a different area of the world, and where you start, might differ on that. But you bring in that expertise. And so I think having the training really will help other organizations to start out on that journey and to get a sense of the kinds of things that they need to think about related to policies, practices, how to execute consistently, and really help, with where do we start with this whole process.
Stephanie, thank you so much for your remarks and also for your additional insights in this Q&A. We're so grateful again to have you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thanks for all that you've done in the DEI space.
Thanks so much, Paul. It was really an honor to be here with you today, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.